This is a lecture from Open Tuition. For the free slides that go with this podcast, please visit opentuition.com.
Mintzberg divides organizations into 5 parts. The strategic apex is equivalent to top management or the board of directors. The middle line is the middle managers, sometimes called the scalar chain. This is a hierarchy as it passes down through the organization. The operating core are the people near the bottom who for the most part do the day-to-day work. Support staff would include the accounting staff and IT staff. Perhaps the hardest to understand is the technostructure. This is the part of parts of the organization responsible for devising and enforcing standards and procedures. It is a technostructure that would write the quality control manual, the employee handbook, the health and safety manual, the finance manual. As drawn, the diagram shows what Mintzberg would have called the machine bureaucracy, which is basically a large mass manufacturing organization. The size and importance of the 5 parts of the organization change as we change the organization. In an entrepreneurial organization there will be a strategic apex and the operating core, but little else. You may remember that the entrepreneurial organization was basically a boss and the workers. There was little middle line, and the organization was so small that there was not much support staff and no need for technostructure. One of the most interesting adaptations of the basic structure is what Mintzberg called the professional organization or professional bureaucracy. He was thinking of something like a large firm of accountants or lawyers. In these organizations, the middle line is much shorter, representing that there's really quite a close relationship between the partners at the top of the organization and the people doing the audit or legal work at the bottom. These people need to communicate and cooperate very closely. There are, of course, middle managers, but the middle line is relatively short. Support staff is still quite large, but what is surprising is that the technostructure is very small. It's perhaps surprising because auditors and lawyers have large files of standardized procedures, for example audit programs, to fill in, and you might think that audits and legal work were highly regulated and standardized. But if you think about it, every client an auditor goes to, or every client coming to see a lawyer, will have slightly different problems. We are not in the mass production manufacturing industry anymore. We're dealing with tailoring solutions to clients. So the technostructure such as it is, represented by standard forms, is somewhat superficial. Each client and each service has to be individually devised and delivered. So the power of the technostructure is relatively small. Organizations are often regarded as having 3 levels. The top level is the strategic level. This is basically the very top managers and the board of directors. They should be looking after the strategy of the organization. And whenever you hear the word strategy, you should be thinking of something like a 5-year plan for the whole organization. What will the organization be doing in 5 years? In what countries will it be operating? Will it still be in manufacturing, or will it have switched to predominantly service provision? Right at the bottom of the organization is the operational level. This is the level where the day-to-day activities are carried out. The time horizons are very short. Often things are dealt with in a day, and planning is often not much longer than a week or 2. These people are predominantly dealing with or recording transactions which are either happening or have already occurred. Processing invoices, sending out orders, dealing with customer queries. These are all at the operational level. In between, there is the tactical level. Think of the tactical level as being the level of a manager of a department. Typically, this person will have a time horizon of about a year, because this person will often be concerned with meeting a year's budget. Of course, they have to deal from time to time with day-to-day activities, but their particular priority will be to make sure that they organize their department to meet this year's budgets and expectations. Organizations are often described as being tall, narrow, or wide, flat. In the tall, narrow organization, each manager or supervisor looks after relatively few people. Here, the diagram has been drawn so that each supervisor directly looks after 2 people. That will be described as having a span of control of 2. In the wide, flat organization, the span of control is much wider. In this diagram, we've shown a span of control of 7, meaning that each supervisor or manager has 7 people reporting directly to him or her. You'll see in a tall, narrow structure there are many layers, and because each manager looks after only a few people, there can be very close supervision. Indeed, it might not be supervision, it might be closer to re-performance or interference. The tall, narrow structure is sometimes described as very bureaucratic, very formal, strict job descriptions, great importance placed on exactly what one's grade is, and the sort of pay and benefits and conditions that would go with that grade. The wide, flat organization is much more egalitarian. There's much less distance between top and bottom in the organization, and communication between top and bottom will be much faster. Because it is more egalitarian, there tends to be less emphasis on strict job descriptions, and a greater emphasis on how can we get the job done, a greater emphasis of all being part of a team, rather than being part of a hierarchy. In the 1990s, there tended to be deliberate moves from tall, narrow to wide, flat by many organizations. They call this delayering or flattening the shape of the organization. There were 2 motives for doing this. First of all, in the 90s, there began to be very great cost pressure from Far Eastern manufacturers where manufacturing was relatively cheap. In response to this, Western businesses had to be somewhat ruthless. They had to decide, is any value being added by these people in the middle, or are they just managers, managing supervisors, managing assistant supervisors? And it was decided that often these people were not adding value and that they could safely be removed from the organization. Secondly, in the 1990s, things began to move quickly. Technology changed very rapidly. There were huge changes in world markets, so that operations based in China or India or Malaysia became very skilled and very adept at designing and launching new competing products. For Western organizations to change and respond, they needed to be quick. And the tall, narrow organization was very slow to change. Many layers had to agree to the change, and many people were protecting their own particular grade. Therefore, to get faster and more flexible responses to change, the wide, flat organization was often adopted.